As you enter the final dungeon chamber, you see the bandit chief with all of his allies at his sides. And you see the villager with a blade at their neck, and you were sent here to save them. Stop! Not a step closer or they'll get it. Steady your blade. Perhaps we can come to an agreement, says the party paladin. The DM looks to that player and says, roll me a persuasion check. And so enters the social pillar of D&D. Let's talk about it. Hi, my name is Chris, and welcome to Ironforge Games, where we forge better games. So what exactly is the social pillar of D&D play? Well, it's pretty much any time that the players are talking either to each other in character or to NPCs in the world. During a social interaction, the adventurers usually have a goal. They want to extract information, secure aid, win someone's trust, escape punishment, avoid combat, negotiate a treaty, or achieve some other objective. Successfully completing the encounter means achieving that goal. Much like exploration, social encounters encompass a broad area of play, primarily focused around conversation with NPCs. So what does that look like, and how do we run it effectively? Let's talk about it. At the core of social encounters and interactions is that of role-playing, both through the players portraying their characters and the DM portraying NPCs in the world. Character actions in these roleplay scenes will often move them forward and change the encounter. How they move the scene forward through their role-playing is dependent on their actions through role-playing. If a character says something to an NPC, the NPC may respond in kind to what they say. Effectively, the players and the DM have in-character conversations, and the scene plays out based on that conversation. Role-playing, though, is a through line through the entire game, as it doesn't just stop at social encounters. Role-playing comes into play in everything, including exploration and combat. With social encounters, it is simply at the forefront as players are outwardly portraying their character, being that character in the moment. These are the moments they get to act out who they are. So that's just it. That is the crux of role-playing right there. It is when players and DMs are acting out their characters. And just like other types of encounters like that in exploration and combat, social encounters can have consequences with them, which is where ability checks come in. As mentioned from the DMG, say the players were trying to extract information from an NPC. This is an action that could certainly have a consequence, so the DM may ask for an ability check roll. Persuasion is most certainly one of the most common social ability checks used in these kind of encounters. However, intimidation and deception, arguably deception having the second most importance, come up often as well. And especially because players like to get in trouble, deception is absolutely one of the bigger skills that could come up very often. And especially with deception, it can have inherent consequences, as players are lying to an NPC typically. Especially if an NPC has a reason to not believe that the players are being fully honest with them, this is absolutely a time when a deception check would be required. Though many of the ability checks used in social encounters are that based off of charisma, there is room for other ability scores on players' character sheets to come into play as well. We'll talk more about this in detail a little bit further in the video. Sticking with ability checks, those ability checks in social interactions typically fall under the influence action. So what is the influence action exactly? When a character is making an ability check with any of their charisma-based skills, they are typically making an influence action, with one exception being that based of wisdom animal handling checks. Depending on how a role-playing encounter has played out, a DM will determine if any creature or NPC is willing, unwilling, or hesitant, and this will determine how players' attempts to influence them play out. Only creatures that the DM would consider hesitant to the player's attempts to influence them, however, would be the ones requiring that of an influence check. As if a creature is already willing to cooperate or work with the players, then they will just help. They will work with the players and do as they are asked. If they are an unwilling creature, however, they're not going to say yes in any circumstance to what the players ask of them. The rules state that there's a default difficulty of DC 15 or the creature's intelligence score, whichever is higher, is going to be the DC for this check. So we've gotten to the point where a DM has decided, okay, a creature that a player is trying to influence is hesitant, so I am going to require a check to influence them through the influence action. Now we need to determine what their starting attitude is upon the influence action. Again, this could most certainly be based on how role-playing encounters could have played out. Perhaps if there is a tense negotiation, just as we talked earlier, between the players and the bandit captain, they could be considered hostile, which may have an effect on their attempts to influence them. A creature could either be considered friendly, hostile, or indifferent towards players. and each has different effects on the influence action. If a creature is friendly, the players have advantage on influence action checks. If they are hostile, the players have disadvantage on checks. And if they are indifferent, there is no modifier. It is just a straight check. Now, let's talk about how we actually portray NPCs and characters. Now, when it comes to a DM portraying NPCs, you've probably heard the most common advice or seen it in actual plays. And that is using of voices and accents that you've probably seen used in actual plays like Critical Role or Dimension 20 to a great extent. However, this is not the only way by any means that you can portray NPCs. Doing voices and having an accent for a certain character can absolutely be useful and be used to distinguish a character. However, things like talking speed can absolutely affect how a character is portrayed as well. If a character is talking really fast, it may seem that they're really nervous, or they're really anxious, or they're really excited. While talking really slowly could indicate a character is very tired or very uninterested. Changing the speed at which you talk can also have a significant impact on how a character is portrayed. Another way that you can portray characters is that through body language. If you stand tall, roll back your shoulders, and you talk with a deeper voice and a slightly slower voice, could give a character more bravado and make them more confident. And if you slouch forward and you talk like this really fast, it could indicate that a character is very sporadic and erratic and manic. As you can see, voices do have an effect. However, things like your speed at which you talk, your body language, all of these things can also have a significant impact on how to distinguish an NPC from one another. The DMG talks about the age-old advice of show, don't tell. So think of what a character is supposed to be like. What is one of their descriptors as far as their personality goes? Are they manic? Are they confident? Now, how do you show that to the players? Another great way that I like to flesh out NPCs a little more is actually stealing a trait from the player's handbook. This would be in the 2014 handbook. It is sadly no longer in the 2024 handbook. But each character background has ideals, bonds, flaws, and traits. And I love using these to help me identify things about my NPCs to help distinguish them. It also can help me get a little more insight into who an NPC is as a person or a character in general, and that will allow me to help me flesh them out a little more at the table to my players. Knowing the ideals, bonds, flaws, and traits can be so helpful, even if it is just a single word to one of these things, to help you distinguish a character at the table. The DMG also talks about fleshing out a character through their traits by simply picking 2 adjectives and using those to lead your portrayal of an NPC when you're role-playing them. Another good method to this is to simply pick a character from media that you really enjoy or think would fit the feel of an NPC you're trying to create. Do the players run into a vigilante in a city that reminds them of Batman? Think of Batman. Which Batman? Which iteration of Batman? The goofy silly ones or the more serious ones? And then take that character from that form of media and then simply take their characteristics and put them into your NPC you are trying to portray. At the end of the day though, do not stress out about this. Ultimately, just think of how a character would act in any given situation, and do your best to emulate it to the best of your ability. Now let's talk about some general tips to just help run social encounters more smoothly. Let's take a moment to talk about insight checks. Similar to that of the perception skill in exploration, the insight skill in the social encounter pillar of play often kind of is a catch-all skill for especially detecting dishonest NPCs or NPCs that may be hiding information. Very important to note though, insight is not a lie detector, even though in actual plays it may kind of come off to be one from time to time. In the player's handbook, the insight skill example use is that to discern a person's mood and intentions, and it falls under the search action in the rules glossary to discern a person's state of mind. Just as perception does not immediately tell you every secret hidden within a room, insight does not tell you everything a person is hiding. But what insight will tell you is that a person looks anxious while they're talking to you. They are sweating, their eyes are darting back and forth, indicating that they are nervous and possibly could be hiding something. The next big tip I want to talk about is that of engaging other players. So now social encounters are where the actors and the storytellers definitely come alive at the table as they are finally able to embody who they came up with as a character. Storytellers and actors most certainly take the spotlight more so in social encounters, and they should. It is what they like about the game. However, this could potentially leave other players out at the table who made a barbarian and simply want to hit things with their big hammer. In social encounters, these types of players could potentially feel a little left out. However, that's something to talk about in session 0. But what can we do if we're already here and the barbarian and the bard are in a social encounter together? Do something to draw them in. While the bard is over there busy trying to smooth things over with the town guard, ask the barbarian, the fighters, the paladins, what they're actively doing in that moment. Are they doing anything specific while the social encounter is currently happening that the other NPCs may notice and comment on? Or perhaps the perceptive druid during the social encounter notices something that the bard doesn't because he is busy talking to the guards while the druid is simply listening. As I mentioned earlier, we can also allow other skills other than charisma to help move social encounters forward. Perhaps the barbarian can use a feat of strength to impress an NPC and make them more willing to have a conversation or more willing to give information. Or perhaps that same barbarian is a very angry and intimidating character and they want to try to intimidate an NPC. Well, guess what? Charisma is probably their dump stat. Let them make that intimidation roll using their strength roll, or maybe even their constitution, whichever you think is appropriate. Or perhaps the wizard, who may not be the most charismatic but is incredibly book smart, could make a historical argument to an NPC and make a history persuasion check instead. At the end of the day, when it comes to engaging other players who are not so charisma focused, be open to potential ideas that they have, or be open to when they want to engage with a social encounter where they may not be most suited via the charisma skill. At the end of the day, social encounters are more so exploration encounters, but more so just focused on talking, as opposed to exploring a physical environment. However, both have obstacles and can involve dice rolls to overcome those obstacles. In both situations, the dice can help tell the story of dealing with those obstacles. Much like in your favorite movies and TV shows, scenes where characters are simply talking to one another can be the most profound and impactful scenes in the entire movie. Where exploration helps lead to revelations that informs the game's story, combat is used for the climactic moments and high-octane action, social encounters tell us more about who the characters of a story actually are. I hope today's overview of the social pillar play for D&D was helpful and has you ready to run your next social encounter. Please leave any comments, ideas, or feedback down below for me as a new creator, and share what was most helpful from this video or how you run social encounters at your table. And I'll see you all next time on Ironforge Games.